turn it over to Mike here.
So again, I think most of the issues that we're going through today are the issues that commonly come up and that have come up most frequently. There are other, obviously, issues, and if you look at this FAD election manual, it sort of has all of the details. It has the recitation of the actual printout of the statute that applies in the back, as well as kind of an overview in the front to guide through. So for all of these, again, it is an overview. There are some pertinent details that are in the manual, but we're just trying to kind of hit the highlights. It'll cover probably 95% of the questions that you may encounter on election day. So for election day registration, you have to prove your residency in the precinct, complete an application, and take an oath. Sometimes what happens is people will show up with the wrong precinct to try and register. In that case, the election judge is supposed to send them to the correct precinct. If you're at the right precinct but have just moved within the precinct, then you just have to provide your updated address and finish completing the application with your new address in order to vote. It's actually, there are 3 or 4 different ways that you can vote on can register to vote on election day. So if you have a voter or someone who wants to vote that's otherwise eligible but hasn't registered, they can show up to register on election day, and it's frankly pretty difficult not to be able to vote. And we're going to run through the different options that person can undertake in order to register on election day. The easiest option is to have a photo ID with a current address. There are only certain types of photo IDs that work. Obviously, you're not going to be able to use your gym membership card, even if it has your address on it. It has to be generally a state-issued ID, so a Minnesota driver's license, learner's permit, or ID, or a receipt for one of those will work. Photo tribal ID that has an address on it. Not all tribes on their photo IDs will have the address on it. In order to use that to vote, a tribal member would have to have one that has their address on it. Or you can use a current valid student ID if that institution has sent in a list of students and that's been certified. And all Minnesota institutions send that in. There's a whole section in the code that goes through when they have to submit it. And typically, they do submit them on time, and so a lot of student IDs can work for ID purposes. So if you don't have, so that's all you would need under that option. If they don't have an ID that has a current address, so if they've moved and they haven't updated their driver's license, you can use a photo ID with an old address plus a utility bill that shows your current address. And these are the types of utility bills that will qualify. One thing to note, and this has come up in the past, is that the due date has to be within 30 days before or after the election on that bill. We had last, in 2008, a couple people that tried to register using this, but it was from 90 days ago. And so they couldn't register using this option. Also, one thing to note on this option is there are a slightly larger list of photo IDs that will qualify, so someone could use their passport. Your passport doesn't have your address on it, but you get to that through the utility bill.
I have kind of a random question about that, but I pay all my bills online and get all electronic statements.
You can print out any electronic statement as long as it's one of those qualifying utility bills. And it has your address on that electronic
But
statement.
I can't pull it up on my iPhone and show it to the election judge right then and there.
That's a great question.
I don't have any experience.
We'll have to look into that. That's a good question. We recommend to make it clearer that someone would print it out, but
e-bills do qualify.
Yeah, e-bills do qualify, so I would think they should take that, but we'll verify that. That's a good question.
Along those lines, does your name have to appear on the bill as well?
Yes. Yeah. The third option is one that a lot of people don't know about, but it also works to enable you to register, and that's if you don't have a current photo ID with your current address, or you don't have one of the other photo IDs and a utility bill, you can have someone vouch for you. They have to be a registered voter in the precinct, and they can be someone that also registered that same day as long as they didn't register by being vouched for. So a non-voucher same-day registrant can vouch for you and say, yes, I know this person, they live in this precinct. And then you can register to vote as long, again, in each of these cases you sign an oath that says you're otherwise qualified. One of the issues that comes up a lot is to be eligible to vote, you do have to be a citizen, but you don't have to bring any paperwork to demonstrate your citizenship. You do sign an oath that says you're a citizen, so you're subject to prosecution if that oath is not true, but you don't have to provide any documentation to that effect. You just provide any of the methods of registering that we just went through.
And this vouching option gets to your question back there. A lot of times roommates have issues with the utility bills, and their roommate can register using their bill, and then they go together, just vouch for their roommate that they live with them, they live in the precinct.
So someone that just registers that day can then vouch for somebody else?
That's
Right.
right.
And there's a limit on the vouching of 15 people. So if you go, you can vouch for up to 15 regular people and say, I know they live here, but they'll keep track of how many you're at.
But if you're vouched for, you can't vouch for other people.
Right.
That's right. There are slightly different rules for residents of residential facilities. There, the voucher for people that are at that facility doesn't need to be a registered voter in their precinct. Instead, they can vouch for any number of residents as long as they vouch that that person is a resident in the precinct. And for residential precincts, I think they also submit a list of people that are currently living in that facility.
A list of their employees.
Oh,
So a
I'm sorry,
homeless shelter
employees.
will submit a list of their employees to the Secretary of State's office 20 days before the election. Then anybody on that list, anyone who's an employee, can vouch for an unlimited number of people in that shelter. So residential facilities get unlimited vouching by employees. So you don't have to be a registered voter in the precinct, but regular people who don't live in these shelters, they follow the previous.
So with respect to that list, and then also the certification that colleges submit, will the election judges have access to the list of employees or the list of colleges that have met the requirements?
Yeah, they're supposed to provide them to the election judges so that they're available at the precinct and so they can verify if that employee is on the list. This has happened where an employee who wasn't on the list tried to vouch for the residents and they weren't able to. But someone else who lived in that precinct and was a registered voter could provide that vouch.